environment that we are raising our children in is unbelievably challenging.
Yeah.
You know, particularly if you're a working mother inside and outside the home. You know, we're still doing 70% of the domestic and the invisible labor despite more mothers working. So essentially we're, you know, a lot of us have got 3 full-time jobs.
Hi, I'm the self-development coach, Johnny Lawrence, and welcome to the Self-Development Podcast. In this episode, I'll be chatting with the founder of MotherKind, Zoe Blaskey. Zoe's been on a path of self-enquiry and transformation following an anxious, depressive breakdown in her early 20s. She's spent the last 15 years diving into all things personal development, sitting in cold church halls in 12-step meetings, meditating with monks at sunrise, and dancing, all dressed in white, on an island in Sweden. That's very intriguing. Can't wait to hear about that. She's reached the depths of despair and risen stronger than ever before, and is obsessed with helping mothers realize their potential and awaken how much personal power they actually have. Zoe recognized the pressure she was putting on herself, her perfectionism, her fear of getting it wrong, how she was silencing herself to keep others' peace, how she is losing her sense of self to what others wanted her to do. Zoe remembers that feeling of being lost, broken, and alone, and now helps other mums overcome this. She's also the host of the massively successful The MotherKind podcast, and today we're going to go deep as we can on how to help some of society's most important people, its mothers. How are you today?
I'm good, thank you. Yeah, I'm well. I've been ill, oh gosh, far too long, about a month with this flu thing. So I'm finally feeling better. How are you doing?
I'm okay. Well, I'm grateful then that you're able to do this today, and I won't tax you too much. I'll try anyway. But I mean, yeah, I suppose we should start at the beginning. I mean, could you tell people a bit about your journey so far and what's led you to do all the important work you do with mothers?
Yeah, so I mean, you said a lot of it really in that really great intro. You know, when you read something back of yourself, you're like, oh yeah, that's really true. That's really true. Exactly that. So I was super lucky because I got into therapy young, like 23. And at the time, I didn't realize that that was a complete gift. I was sort of frustrated that I had to be there. Now I see that completely differently. So by the time I had my first child at 32, I sort of thought that I would have a handle, not on the practicalities of it at all. I thought I would have a handle on the inner challenges of it because I'd learned so much about fear, acceptance, ego. Like I just really dived into all of that. I'd been in therapy, 10 years and loads of other healing, and I really got into it. So I thought, okay, I'm going to really struggle with the sleep and with how to feed the baby and how to change a nappy because I didn't know any of that. But I thought I'll be all right on the emotional side of it because I've got these amazing tools and I know what I'm doing and I've read all the books. And the experience was the opposite of that.
Yeah.
Hell surprise. And what I actually found was that the practical stuff I could learn, and actually, I think most people can learn how to change a nappy and mix up a bottle. Where I felt absolutely lost was the shifts that were happening inside of me. And I didn't know words like matrescence, which is the term that we use to the becoming a mother, just like adolescence. So I didn't know that it was actually meant to be a really bumpy time internally, a time of transformation, a time where everything that you've sort of known and you think you know about yourself and your life gets lobbed up into the air and mixed up and jumbled up. I didn't know any of that. And I think when you're in those times of high stress, which having children is, whatever age they are, and you're exhausted, you fall back on, I call them unhealthy coping behaviors. So my conditioning that I learned when I was little, that I'd worked really hard to change, when I became a mother, they all came back because I just didn't have the bandwidth and resilience. So I found myself back in micromanaging, which is something that I did to feel safe in the world, back in controlling everything, compulsive list writing, back into fear, excessive worry, back into perfectionism, and just not feeling, when you do the work, and I know you talk about that loads on your podcast, you have that sense of ease with life. That's what I got from it, like a sense that I'm okay, it's okay, I can handle it. I lost that completely.
Oh,
So
wow.
I was like, okay, what I'm going to do is what I've always done. I'll just go and find the people who are talking about this, and I'll learn from them, and I'll go on their workshops, and I'll listen to their podcasts, and I'll figure this out. And there was nothing. What I found was tons of parenting, tons of parenting. Like, this is how to get your baby into routine. This is how to do discipline. This is how to speak to you. I was like, I don't need any of this, because I'd also got quite quickly that none of those parenting strategies would help me when I was dysregulated. None of them. None of them. It was impossible. So I found one person called Dr. Shafali, who's now really well known in America, and she was talking about the idea that our children will mirror back to us unhealed parts of us. And I was like, this is more like it, because that's what was happening to me. I didn't know then that our children activate that part in us. It was at the same age as our children were. And of course, when I asked my mum, how were you when I was a baby, she mirrored back to me all the same words that I was feeling. So I was like, okay, this is how it goes. But I didn't know any of that before. So I started just selfishly. I started in every nap time, I would be consuming, reading, studying things around essentially, conscious parenting, trauma. I started to get really into attachment and understand what that was. I never knew any of that before. So, and I started to change. I started to get that feeling back of like, oh, okay, this is what this is. I can put a word to it. I understand myself better now as a mother. I understand what this little being is triggering in me and why it's doing that. And I started to change. And a few friends were like, so you're really like, you seem different. And I was like, yeah, I've been, studying this stuff. And I went and found some specialist therapists, and they were like, you should talk about this. And I was like, no way. Because at the time I was sort of, a bit corporate, and, this sort of work that I did was for me. I never envisaged myself doing it publicly. Or anyway, as these things do, I did then end up doing it, because I just thought someone has to do this.
Yeah.
And I waited a while, I think like 2 years, and no one was doing it. So I was like, I'll do it.
You did that mum thing. You're like, if you want something done, do it
Yeah,
yourself.
do it yourself. Exactly. And the resistance was hiding a ton of passion. I had so much passion for this, that the fear was around being public, because that's something that I'd never really saw in my life plan, having a public profile and being known. And so yeah, that was how the podcast started. And then people started asking me for that support from a coaching perspective. So I'd already done some coach training, but I went away and did more, and I trained as a transformational coach, and I actually ended up studying with Dr. Shafali. And wow. So I did lots of other bits, and that's how it started 5 years ago.
I mean, there's so much there.
I gave you a long answer.
But it's wonderful, because it's really hard. One of the things that people sometimes struggle with is communicating how they feel. And quite often what I hear as a coach is, I just feel stuck. They just feel stuck. They just feel like they're trapped, or they can't get out, or that, they feel imprisoned by their own life. And parenting, like you say, it does exactly that. It reflects back to you, whether or not you're able to sit with that and acknowledge that. Or like we said before we press record, people struggle with things they don't want to be true. So if you don't want to be something to be true, then you will try your hardest to not let it be true. But parenting is extremely difficult. And I remember when we had our first child, and we were having a lot of trouble, and we were in our out of hours, because obviously your kid only gets ill on a Friday, just as the doctors are closing. So we were in out of hours, and I remember sat with this lady, and she was a bit older, and she said to me this, and it was the best piece of advice I think I ever got. And they said, so have you read all the parenting books? I said, yeah, I have, yeah. And they said, yeah, just remember, the kid hasn't. And I was just like, oh, that's helpful advice, because it's true. We try and inflict these sort of rules and understanding of how we think things should be for our children, and our children have definitely got another idea of how things should be. And that's what I learned from that conversation. But I mean, you spoke a lot about that feeling of like it felt to me like what you were describing was just that real sort of anxiety, that overwhelm, that feeling of being out of control. Like what can you talk about that? Can you talk about that feeling so people understand that you are talking about the same feeling as they are probably experiencing?
Yeah, and I think everyone experiences it differently, right? Depending on our unique blueprint and conditioning of what we experienced.
Mm.
But for me, I think it was, we know this, don't we, of the way that the brain works, as when we're tired, we're less able to grab those higher thoughts, right? Those better thoughts. We're less able to get into responding mode as
Yeah.
opposed to reaction mode. And so
Yeah.
what I found in those early months was that I was just continually reacting, and not sort of past that early, that early newborn bit. Of course, it's just like you just get in the trenches. I'm talking sort of that 9 months plus bit when I really start to think, okay, I want to feel more myself again here. I want to feel like I've got a handle on this, and I just didn't. And for me, one of my big coping behaviors was around control and perfectionism and comparison, and really worrying about what other people thought. And I really got quite lost in that. There was this sense that I just wasn't a good enough mother. And actually, when I started to really unpack that, I'd always felt not good enough. Always. It's just that motherhood, I think, I sometimes I think of it as like, cracks in a mirror or glass. They're there, and then motherhood really does open those up. So I found that not feeling good enough was like the volume was like turned up to 100 in motherhood, because of course I loved my little baby so much, and I so wanted to just be that sort of perfect mother. Of course that doesn't exist, but my inner critic and my wiring didn't know that. I was in that primitive brain, it didn't know that.
It sounds like
So
such a lot of pressure.
yeah, a lot of
Yeah.
pressure, a lot of pressure. And I think that's what I see really universally, actually, particularly with mothers, although, fathers absolutely included in this conversation. We just see it more with mothers, and I see it in a different way
Yeah.
with mothers. Yeah, I think that pressure is huge. And, what I saw and what I see in myself and others is that so often we think that the way out of that is to do more.
Oh,
So
absolutely. Yeah.
if I read more books, if I play more games, if I go to more classes, if I write more lists, if I control more, if I make more nutritious meals, then it'll all be okay. And actually, it's the opposite of that is actually going to make it okay, which is learning to feel. You start with yourself first, because of course all of our external behavior and the things that we do, and those behaviors that we fall back on, they're just a reflection of what's going on inside. So if we can think, okay, I've got to figure out what's going on for me here. And I'm not talking about hours in therapy, because we're mums, right? We do not have time for that.
Oh.
So I teach journaling, like super quick, simple daily journaling questions that are just going to plug you straight into what's going on for me, what's coming up, how do I need to change it, what thoughts are keeping me stuck, and what might a more empowering thought be. Simple stuff. But actually, when we're in the sort of the melting pot of the pressure and everything changing around us, this massive love, more than we've ever felt before, we need really simple tools, and we need really quick tools. And I think you've got a question that you wanted to ask me about guilt, because that's something that I had never had to handle before I became a mother. I was like, what is this?
Oh, it's unbelievable. Like, and it's such a self-perpetuating state of thinking, because you feel guilty about feeling guilty. And it just goes on and on and on. And Dr. Julia Smith, she talks a lot about how you feel affects how you think, and how you think can affect how you feel, but understanding the difference. And it's that self-perpetuating feeling of guilt that it just gets you trapped in your own sort of psyche, doesn't it? And you feel that's where you get that stuck feeling,
Yeah, and that's why I'm so passionate, about teaching mothers these really simple like tools that you and I would have learned on day one, right, of coaching school or whatever development modality we're in. They're not difficult, and that is so important. But they are really profound. And the one with guilt that most people, or certainly most mothers I work with, haven't got until they get smacked by that guilt is that you are not your thoughts. You may think you are guilty, but you are not. And that often is like the gateway into, oh my gosh, so what other thoughts about myself might I need to challenge or believe aren't true? Maybe I'm not a terrible person.
Yeah.
Maybe that person next to me isn't better than me. Maybe I am capable of more that I'm doing. Maybe I am worthy of stating my needs in the family, of setting a boundary, of asking for fairer division of labor at home. I feel like being able to challenge those disempowering thoughts and know that they actually aren't me and they aren't you is so foundational, right, to any change. And you would teach that, I would teach that. But I think there's something about motherhood that helps us to get these ideas, if we haven't got them before, really quickly, because we need them so quickly.
Yeah.
And I think you can just apply them so quickly to any area of your life and as a mother, and it will just have a profound change.
Yeah, I mean, we're so lucky as coaches because we do get to look behind the curtain. So you see some influencer on Instagram who looks like they've got it all together and they've just had a baby and everything looks like bliss. They might even have a TV show or something. And then you get to speak to them and you realize it's not like that. And you're like, whoa, okay. Yeah. So what's the problem? Like, I feel like I'm losing my mind. It's like, oh, so you're just like every mum then?
Yeah,
it's
exactly that. Every single person, like Glennon Doyle, who I love, she came on the podcast, and the way that she writes and the way that she speaks and all the way that she's unpacked and shed so many layers. I really admire the woman. She came out 2 weeks ago and said, I've actually been in active addiction of anorexia the whole time.
Yeah.
And it was really profound moment for me, that of compassion for her and her experience, but just to remind myself that everyone is going through their own pain, their own challenges. No one, absolutely no one, I don't believe, we've yet to meet them yet, has that perpetual sense of peace of mind and serenity and happiness. No one does.
And you know what? That's so important. I really want to stay there for a minute because you're absolutely right. Everybody is going through that. And you were talking about like recognizing what you need to do for yourself. But what ends up happening is that potentially addiction or whatever it is, that distraction, that a way of avoiding how uncomfortable that feeling is, creeps in. And that could be alcohol, it could be social media, it could be drugs, it could be anything, it could be shopping, could be whatever it is. But we latch onto that because it gives us that quick fix, that quick feeling of, oh, I feel a bit better now. But then all you've done is kick the can down the road because you're ignoring the bigger issue. And it doesn't surprise me. People have that addiction can creep in with anorexia, or it can come in as overeating. It can come in so many different ways. The problem isn't the food. The problem isn't the drugs. The problem isn't the alcohol. The problem is the addiction. The addiction is, what are we doing to avoid what we're feeling? And that's where I come back to, although it's not one of the questions I told you I was going to ask you. It's around that. You said it earlier about that sort of conditioning, that conditioned self and authentic self. And I know that Dr. Shefali talks a lot about that. And that to me is, and it speaks to like shadow work as well and all that sort of stuff. And that's the big thing is we are conditioned and we don't know it. And then we have our authentic self. Maybe it's that little version of us as a kid that walks up to the mirror with curiosity and touches the mirror and kisses themselves and stuff, that then turns into that person that looks in the mirror and says, oh, what's this? And it's that difference that we're trying to find out what's going on in between that. And it's like, you have these motherly instincts that you want to do things a certain way, but we can't do it that way because in this book it says I can't. I have to put them down every 4 hours and feed them every time. And in my life with my wife, the only time that parenting's ever felt like really like we're nailing it, which is not often, is when we sack all that advice off and we just do what we feel. Because guess what, as a parent, you're probably not going to put your kid in danger. Not really. Not if you're a loving parent, And that's the other part of it as well, is that the people that are terrible parents aren't asking themselves if they're terrible parents.
They're not reading the books, and
They're not.
they're not guilty. They're not that's it. So,
Yeah.
often that sense of guilt and pressure, is really a sign of how important it is.
Yeah.
And it's just right sizing it. You want a little bit of like, God, this is really important. Arguably for me, the relationship that I have with my children, and that's all it is. It's a relationship that I want to last forever.
Yeah.
That would be in the top 3 most important things of my life, bar none, right? So the other one being the relationship with myself, and the other one with my friends and family and partner. So yeah, I think it's so important to have compassion as well, though, because you were talking about those behaviors, and I just, if someone is listening going, oh my God, that's me, I know that I'm numbing out on Instagram every night. Well, me too. And I know that I'm drinking too much wine. And I think Gabor Mate, who I've studied and has been on the podcast, and I know that his work as well, he talks about those behaviors are essentially self-soothing. They're where we don't have the tools to soothe ourselves in another way. And it's where we perhaps didn't get that soothing that we might have needed when we were little, because whether we like it or not, like you said, the truth that we might not want to face is that so much of that conditioning does get set up in childhood. That is just how it is. But the great news is that we also have neuroplasticity. So we understand that conditioning, and we can change it. That's what is just incredible about being a human, right? We can have these experiences, we can go through these things, we can be told things that aren't true about ourselves, or pick up those beliefs, and then we can change them. But that does take, as you were saying, that gap, that takes work and focus. And unfortunately for mothers, particularly in that first sort of 10 years, you're going to be the most time poor you've ever been. So I work really hard with MotherKind to make sure that everything that we do is really simple and really accessible. Like, I do the work, like I study for hours these concepts, and then I try and package them, like particularly in the podcast, like in 45 minutes, or in something, or on social, or in my newsletter, or any other content, in a really simple, accessible way, because we just haven't got the time often.
And I knew I'd met a fellow geek. But it's funny, it's that we talk about like that self-soothing, but we repackage it and sell it to ourselves as self-sabotage. Oh, I'm drinking again. Oh, I'm on the phone again. That's not what's wrong. It's the fact that you feel like you have to do that. If it's a choice, that's okay. If you choose to sit on your phone, or you choose to have a drink, and that's it, and you can choose to stop, that's fine. But it's that feeling of choice that's been taken away that starts to make it feel like self-sabotage. And then we apply, which mothers don't need. They don't need any more guilt, but then they apply more guilt to themselves around that. And I think
we tend to think that we can hate ourselves happy.
Oh yeah, it's hard to watch.
And you just can't.
No.
You have to start with self-compassion for everything, even for the hardest parts of what you feel, in immense shame or guilt or fear, or just wish that it was different, it was different.
Oh yeah.
That's the part of you that needs the most understanding. And I think when you start to look at, okay, why is it that I would be like that? And it really doesn't take long. Like, I'm not a massive fan of long-term psychotherapy. Like, I don't think it takes 20 years to figure out the way that you are. I think, just asking yourself a few really powerful questions. And Dr. Nicola Perra, who's called the holistic psychologist, is amazing for this. She's got a new workbook out. It's honestly decades worth of work in a workbook. I've just been sent it. It's amazing. You can ask yourself just a few really simple questions and start to understand why you are the way that you are, or what might be triggering you in order to do that. Or okay, so my child's just turned 7. What did I feel like as a 7-year-old? Oh yeah, that's when I started to feel really lost. Maybe that's why I'm drinking more, or eating less, or eating more, let's go back to that place. How could I help myself? How could I reparent myself effectively, is what we're really doing. Think about that 7-year-old, and what did that 7-year-old need? Okay, well, she needed a hug. Could I give that to myself, or could I ask someone that I feel really safe with to do that for me every day this week? Really, deep stuff, but simple strategies is what I'm about.
No, and I've never really met a solution that doesn't in some way involve some form of compassion. Because I think compassion allows you to see things as they are in some way. And it's like, for me, if someone does something really bad to you, and it's hard, and I get all that. I'm not saying, oh, just think yourself happy. I'm not like, oh, I promise you that. But what I'm saying is when the time is right, when you've validated them emotions and you've stopped short of ruminating, and you can sit back and you can go, okay, what would I have done in that situation? It's usually the kinder way to look at things for yourself as well as the other person. And that doesn't mean you have to forgive people. It just means you have to have an understanding so you can move forward. But I mean, I can hear now that, and I've heard plenty of mums say this, they get frustrated by people offering advice around motherhood because their automatic go-to is, it's okay for you, but it's different for me. It's different for them, right? Because they've got this and they've got that, and they've got all these reasons, and they're valid. And I'm not dishonoring those reasons. But what I'm saying is that stubbornness to see what is really happening is sometimes the barrier. Quite often it's that conflict that comes from the resistance to what you know is going on that causes that feeling of uncomfortableness. So, this feels like real women would say this. So I'm thinking to myself, like, how do we move away from that feeling?
I mean, I think the truth of it is, and this isn't just for mothers, I think this is for anyone. When you get fed up of your own story, like when you get fed up of your own shit, if I can swear.
Of course.
that's like the most exciting thing that can happen to me when I get onto it with a coaching client, or whether I'm speaking to a group of mothers or whatever, and they're like, I just really want to change this now. I'm like, amazing, you're ready now. Whereas I think if you're in that place where you're, rightly so, the environment that we are raising our children in is unbelievably challenging. Yeah. Particularly if you're a working mother inside and outside the home, we're still doing 70% of the domestic and the invisible labor despite more mothers working. So essentially we're, a lot of us have got 3 full-time jobs. We are exhausted. We aren't supported by society. A lot of the support for mothers has diminished away in the last 20 to 30 years. So all of that is true. Yeah. And I feel all of that. And I know that every mother, probably every parent listening to this, will feel all of that. But there's an and, which is I also have some self-agency and some power here to change the bits that I can. So there are amazing groups out there just doing mind-blowing work to help mothers, to help us have more equitable workplaces, to help us have more support inside and outside the home. Incredible activists. But that is going to take time. MotherKind is about recognizing all of that, validating all of that struggle. Absolutely right, it's bloody hard.
Yeah.
And then there's this big and in the middle, which is where I sort of step in, and let's have a look at what we could do to help make this easier for you.
Yeah.
So there's, I talk to mums day in, day out about boundaries, about people pleasing, about empowerment, about asking for help, asking for what we need, about getting more rest, about prioritizing how things feel over how it might look. I help them stop overthinking and ruminating and draining their energy by worrying about what everyone thinks all the time. I help them start to be kinder to themselves. I help them start to parent in a way that actually feels right to them, and lob all the parenting books out, bar a few that I think are quite good. So, both are true. Both are true. Yeah. And I think when you're ready to bridge that, and this is really shit and this is really hard, and I wonder if there's something that I could do to make it easier for myself, then you're ready. And I wouldn't drag anyone over that bridge ever, because that's not my job. My job is when you're ready to try a few new tools and to see if we could make things easier for you on the inside, and then obviously that's what follows on the outside, then MotherKind is there. But I would never, ever, ever say to anyone who is stuck in that place, you need to change, you're making it harder for yourself. That's not my job. No one could change. More pressure. No one could change me before I wanted to change. I was very happy where I was in my cycles. You see what you're meant to see. I really believe this, right on time. And you get to that moment where you're like, I am bored of feeling run ragged and putting everyone's needs above my own. That might
Oh,
take years, it might take days, it might take weeks, I don't know. But I know that point where you're like, I don't want to do this anymore. That's when you need to pick up the MotherKind podcast or your podcast, or pick up a book, or just start writing it out or voice it to someone. And that's the beginning of change.
yeah, it's awareness, isn't it? It's just having that awareness and knowing that this is a problem now. I resonate with you so much because I grew up, it's a bit heavy, but I grew up in a domestic violence situation and a lot of abuse as a kid. And I watched my mum do what I don't know, as a parent now, I have no way of looking back. I don't understand how she did it. I just don't know how she did it. 4 children, and she managed to do it with all that violence at home, no money. And I think to myself, how did you do it? How did you do it? And she didn't have that advice that we all have now. She was just going day to day. But one thing she never did was she never give up. She just found a way. She just found a way every day. And I remember, it reminds me of this time when I remember when there was an incident at home and there was a lot of violence, and I stepped in and helped, and my mum got a bit concerned about how that might turn out. So I decided to leave and I moved out. And I remember I had a couple of jobs, and I was walking down the road one day and I was crying because I didn't have any money. I had 4 jobs, no money, and I couldn't believe how hard life was. I was 16 years old. And I was just like, what is going on? This can't be true. This can't be how life is. And I'm not going to say I was suicidal or anything, but I was definitely, I had a I want to give up type of feeling. And I got to the end of this alleyway and I was crying my eyes out, and I looked down on the floor and there was £20. And I thought, are you kidding me? What that taught me, that's true, that story. And what that taught me was that moment before you give up could be that moment that you find your £20. So don't give up, because you don't know what's around the corner, and that's what I keep trying to help people understand. And that's what I resonate with you is just that you're not saying it's, oh, you shouldn't feel this way. You're not piling on more guilt. You're saying, yeah, it's there. Let's stop worrying about that. Let's start focusing on the solution instead of the problem. And I absolutely love that. And I only wish she was around 20, 30, 40 years ago. I don't want to give my age away. So but I just admire what you're doing, because I can't tell you how connected to that I am. I know I'm a man, I get that, but I get it as well. I've seen it firsthand. It's hard.
Yeah,
It's really,
it's
really
really
hard.
hard. It's really hard. And I think, if anyone doesn't understand that or validate it, then I personally would really challenge that. I think
So would
that
I.
the era of, think happy thoughts and you'll be happy, and you've got to be positive, toxic positivity, I'm happy to say that is changing. And I think there's far less tolerance for that type of teaching and content these days, and I'm all for that, because
Same.
I think it does a real disservice to the very real struggles that, on different levels, every single person goes through every day. The bigger question is, like you were describing with that beautiful story about your mum and just how she kept going. It's like, what do I do with those struggles? How can I take how hard this is,
Yeah.
and just tiny things to make it easier for me, to make it less brutal. That sounds brutal. That would be the word that I'd put to it.
Yeah. Relentless.
Relentless and
Yeah.
brutal, for
Yeah.
sure, for sure. And also, I think it's really important to say that, there's this sort of idea as well in our world that you do all this alone, and that's not true either. I think it's really, really important to get support and ask for help. And sadly, on a societal level, that support has definitely fallen away for mothers. Also on a practical level, most of the mothers that I speak to and work with live miles from their extended family.
Yeah.
Often yeah, we do. We're 4 hours away from either side of our family, and that's the norm, right? So we need to remember that actually mothering and parenting in this way is completely new. It's like, it's not even a speck. If human history was, a piece of paper, it's not even a speck of how new this is.
Yeah.
It was only 100 years ago we would raise our children in community. There would be
Absolutely.
extended families around. There would be great aunts. There would be, that's just how it was. It's only really in the last 100, 150 years that we live like this, isolated, separate. And we now have, more working mothers than ever before, which is incredible. But the systems in the homes haven't caught up with that. So we have this, I feel like we're our generation of mothers are almost like the experimentation.
Yeah, you've got 2 jobs.
Generation. We've got 2 jobs.
Yeah, literally. Like, because I'm telling you now,
full-time jobs. And then
absolutely.
we go, there's something wrong with me that I'm not doing this
Oh,
right.
couldn't have put it better myself. You're right.
That's what happens. So I really, core to MotherKind and what we talk about is there's nothing wrong with you. This world is fucked up for how we treat mothers. It really is. We're the you said it at the top, I think, and fathers. But I talk to mothers because the system is that we are still the predominant caregiver. We still hold maybe not in your family, but in most atypical families, it's the woman thinking about, are they emotionally okay? It's the woman that tends to read the parenting books. It's the woman that tends to think about what's for dinner tonight, what time's pick up, what club I need to pay for that club. Oh, it's that friend's birthday. What card do they need? They don't like that toy. They like that toy. Yep. Okay. I need to go to the shops to get that. But on the way, I need to go to pick up that person. And I said I'd pick up their child and they're in that class. And I need to say hello to that teacher. And her name is. This is what we hold in our head, right?
Right, that right there is a minute's worth of being a mum. That's exactly what that is.
Yeah, it's constant.
You sound like my wife.
And exactly it's constant and it doesn't stop. And holding that emotional load and invisible labor. And if we're working, we're holding all of that as well, has a real impact. So, that's why I'm so passionate about validating all of that and offering tools. If I could change all of that, of course that's what we would want.
I think you're doing it.
We are where we are, and I think I'm really passionate about daily things that we can do to support ourselves better. But for sure, it's so important for anyone listening to remember that context that we're raising in. I also think it's really important to remember that we are the first generation of parents raising our children with smartphones in our pockets.
Oh, that's important.
Right?
That's
before
very important.
We can Google anything that's we're worried about and get a billion, probably more, different answers and ideas. We also have these things that are constantly vying for our attention. And, the studies show that even if you're not on the phone, even if your phone is on the table, you are 30% less present with those around you.
Mm-hmm. This
is massive. And we're the first generation raising children like this where we have phones in our pockets and, your 13-year-old probably has a phone as well. And the impact of that. So, I think it's really important for parents to remember that context and then think about, okay, when you're fed up, when you want more tools, when you want a different idea, what can I do and where can I go? And that's where MotherKind steps in.
This is exactly what I'm talking about. Your passion is, you're right. Like all of these things matter. I mean, I was speaking to my nephew the other day and he has no way of comprehending what it's like to live without a phone. Like I was trying to tell him, like I used to meet my mates and if I didn't meet him at the park, I'd meet him at the phone box or there was this other place, but we'd find each other. And we'd look for where the big pile of bikes were probably. And he's just looking at me like I was speaking some other language. He just couldn't understand it. It was just like, he doesn't get it. And this is what I mean. Like, that's how quickly a generation has become reliant on the phone.
Yeah.
It's just inconceivable that it can't be with them at all times. And I get it because it is important. But as you rightly say, we are the first generation doing this.
Yeah, like it's a complete experiment. And then parents beat themselves up. Oh, I don't know what to do about screen time, about the phone. It's like, hang on a minute, this is so new. Of course we don't know what we're doing. We're all learning from it. We don't even have the longitudinal studies that show, like we do in many other areas of parenting. We don't know. So I think, again, it's that compassion, like the speed with which our world is changing. And most parents, certainly the ones listening to this, are trying to raise grounded, happy, resilient children in a world which is quite frankly insane.
Yeah.
It's really hard. It's really hard. So I think
that's why it feels hard.
Because it is hard. I always say that. It feels hard because it is hard, not because you're doing anything wrong.
Yeah.
And there are loads of ways that you can make that hard feel a bit easier. Loads of ways.
And it might feel very counterintuitive as well. Like quite often those things that help us the most, there is a little bit of resistance to them. Doesn't mean they're not right, though.
There's always
Yeah.
resistance.
Doesn't mean they're not right, though, does it? It just means that there's a bit of resistance because we're not used to it, you know?
Yeah. So
Yeah.
the thing to know about your brain is that your brain will always go for what feels familiar. So if you are the type of mother who is used to consistently putting everyone's needs above themselves, and maybe you started doing that when you were 5 because you just figured out that that was the way to get love and attention, is when you asked your mummy how you could help, and you got so much praise and love for that. That just started to wire together, right? So your neurons would have wired together, created a pathway. Okay, the way I get love is I forget about myself and I give to others. If you've been running that system for 35 years, you're a mother, you're now burnt out and exhausted from that behavior, and you go, do you know what? I've listened to this podcast. This woman was banging on about the importance of my needs. I'm going to give that a go. It's going to be really, really, really hard.
Yeah.
Because all of that conditioning is going to go, no, 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 no. The way we get love is by putting other people first. So if you say, today, I'm going to stop work an hour before the school run, and I'm going to go for a walk around the park without my phone maybe, and I'm going to do some deep breathing, I'm going to go look at nature, everything in you is going to go, that is a ridiculous idea. You've got so much to do. Who do you think you are? You've got to cook the dinner, you've got to finish your work, you've got to do the emails, your house is a mess, you look a mess, you need a shower. It's going to throw so much at you to not do that. Expect that, right? I think if you expect change or any development work to be easy, that's going to make it a lot harder. So expect it to be really hard and do it anyway, but start small. So you might not go for an hour walk, you might go for a 5-minute walk, and then the next day you might do another 5-minute walk, and then you might build it up to 10 minutes. And what you're doing is slowly changing that pathway. And then you want to be jotting down, I went for a 5-minute walk and I noticed I smiled a lot more when I went to pick the kids up. I went for a 10-minute walk and I noticed when I'd cooked that meal and it got rejected again, I shouted a little bit less. I went for a 15-minute walk. Do you know what I mean? It's just like, and I'm not saying a walk, it's just what's in my head. It could be anything. It could be doing some deep breathing. It could be journaling. It could be doing 10 minutes yoga. It could be whatever. But just start noticing. Notice what you notice about when you do something differently, what happens. And then you'll start to notice the ripple effect on everyone around you. And that's where it gets really exciting for mothers, I think, because when they start on this path of change and doing things differently, they really notice, God, that had an impact on my family. Me doing that had an impact on my family. And actually, and then you can look at it in a deeper way and say, do you know, I was raised by a mother who never put her needs front and center, and that's really got this belief in me, and I don't want my children to look at a mother who's doing the same thing. So you can change like quite deep-rooted generational patterns in quite simple ways. Like, I really want my girls to see me living my life, loving my life, because it's easier to become what you can see. Like, I can say to them all day long, I want you to be empowered, I want you to be joyful, I want you to be happy, I want you to know your worth, girls, know your worth. But that's just going to be words if they then see me running myself ragged. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, no, you're right. There's that quote, isn't it? Sorry, go ahead.
I was just going to say, it's a real cognitive dissonance, that, where it's like, well, you're saying this to me, but I'm seeing this. It's far easier for children to actually not use all the words. And this is something that I've learned from some amazing guests on my podcast, not be using all the words, but showing all the behaviors. Showing, like, I'll, you know, sometimes my husband will be like, oh, I'm not making the supper, and or whatever, and I'll say really clearly, really loudly, so the girls hear, right? Yes, you are. Cooking is not my responsibility. I didn't apply for the job. I didn't apply for it. I don't remember accepting that role, so it's shared. And the girls hear that, and I'm like, there's no way they're going to end up, you know, with partners that aren't respectful and kind, because I'm trying so hard to model it.
And that's exactly right. You're exactly right. And it's like, I was going to say the quote, I think it's like, kids will never do as we say, but they'll never fail to behave the way we do, or something like that.
That's it.
You know, and that's it. We show them all the time. Everything we do is an opportunity. I'm always conscious of that. And sometimes, like, and that's the other part of it. I always try to look at life like we're practicing, you know, because like for me, it removes that pressure of perfection.
Yeah, that's it. You have to be a bit careful with that message, because I've talked about it in the past, and parents have messaged me saying, I feel so much pressure because often people talk about 80% of parenting is modeling. Now, I think that's true, but I think what we need to remember is that we also model getting it wrong. We also model, I'm really working on, I always encourage my clients, they're like, I'm not telling anyone, I'm not telling my children that I'm doing this work. I'm like, absolutely tell them I'm working on being less perfectionist. If you see mummy beating herself up because she's burnt the dinner again, will you remind me that it's okay to burn the dinner?
Yeah.
Will you remind, get your kids
right.
involved in your development, because they'll learn so much from that. So much from that, seeing that change is possible, that we love ourselves even when we get it wrong. Modeling isn't about I model being a perfect parent. Modeling is about I know what's important in my life and I model trying to live my life that way. That's how I see it.
Yeah, I got to tell my son this morning that I've made a mistake. I looked at him and I said, like, I thought this and I made this assumption and I was wrong and I'm sorry. And he just looked at me like, oh, okay. And it's because we do that, some of the funniest moments in our kitchen in the morning are when my kids quote me back to me. And I'm like,
do that.
oh.
Well, I teach my girls like body autonomy, right? So when you're full, when you're cold, And the other day it was freezing, like nearly snowing, and my 7-year-old would not put a coat on, and I was like,
what's that about, kids?
I was like, honey, it is really, really, really cold. You really need a coat. And she was like, but mummy, you tell me that it's my body and my body doesn't feel. And I was like, oh, she's bloody got me. She has got me. She's got me. So I had to wing away. I was like, that is true. And sometimes mummy does know that it's going to be cold out there, and you don't know that yet.
I'm really aware that I've got more questions and stuff, and you're probably running out of time. So I'm gonna move on to a couple of ones that I feel are important. But I just wondered, have you spoken about guilt enough? Do you think, is there anything that you want to talk about? Because you hear that term all the time, mum guilt. Mum guilt. And it's interesting, someone pointed out to me that there was no saying for dad guilt.
Well, because it's different, because mum guilt is absorbed from millennia and generation upon generation of mothers feeling guilty. And you could ask the question, who benefits if mothers feel guilty and are continually scrabbling to do better, do more? Who benefits from that? That would be an important question to ask. We won't dive all the way into that now, but I think it's important to know that your guilt is not yours. It has been passed to you, likely from, God, how many generations back. So that's the first thing, is that's often where it's from, and it's really important to challenge it. It's really, really, really important to challenge it. So I think about earned guilt and unearned guilt. So earned guilt is where we rightfully feel guilty, right? So one of my values is I speak kindly and compassionately to people in my life. So if I absolutely lost it at one of my kids or one of my friends and I just scream, I would feel guilty about that. That is good. That shows that
You're not a serial killer.
I'm not a serial killer. I'm not a psychopath. And actually, it's only psychopaths that feel no guilt at all. So anyone that's promising you to eradicate all your mother guilt, you want to be a bit nervous of that, right?
Yeah.
So there is
good advice.
Yeah, right. Don't go there. So there is earned guilt. And that is important. That is a feedback mechanism that we learn in order to do something super important in life and parenting, which is called repair. You know what, I'm really sorry I lost it. I hadn't eaten. This work email was just on my mind. I was knackered. I was and I lost it. And I'm really sorry. I know that might have made you feel afraid. I could see that you've maybe felt afraid. You really validate how that might have felt for that person. You repair it. So next time, before pickup, I'm going to make sure that I've eaten lunch. I'm going to make sure that I've taken a few breaths and I put my phone away, girls, so that I'm much less likely to do that to you again. I'm really sorry. Right, that's what it might look like. Okay, Now this is not scientific, but in my estimation of working with God knows how many mothers, thousands at this point, I reckon that earned guilt is about 5% of what we experience, of where we've actually done something that goes against our values and how we want to be, and we feel guilty about it. The rest of the 95% is what I call unearned guilt. And that is where we are doing three things. So the first one is that we are measuring ourselves against a standard which is not our own. Example, we might have this idea that good mothers cook a nutritious homemade meal every night. Where did that come from? Probably from really outdated old-fashioned TV shows that you were watching when you were like 3 or 4. Maybe your own mother did that. Maybe your grandmother said, you know, a mother's job is to fill their children's bellies with homemade. Maybe you heard that message enough times, but that would have come from somewhere, that message, right? Because we know not true.
The source is important.
That's not what a good mother is. A good mother is far more than that. So you might have been running this belief that a good mother ... And it's really important to get all those out, because is what is going to be directly feeding into what you feel guilty about. Yeah. Maybe you have one that a good mother stays at home with her children. A good mother does every school pickup. A good mother doesn't let her children go hungry, or, you know, if they're begging for another snack or whatever. A good mother doesn't set boundaries with her partner. A good mother is always in the home and doesn't go for weekends away without her children. Whatever it might be, you need to get all those out, because this is why it's really important. If you then do something that goes against one of those unconscious beliefs, you'll start feeling guilty. Yeah. So if you're running an unconscious belief that good mothers do school pickup every day, and you have a job which doesn't allow you to do that, you're going to start feeling guilty about that.
That's a big one. Like I can't make sports day because I'm working, stuff like that. It's just like, it's an impossible situation that you are doing your best for, and I don't think people realize you are doing your best. By definition, you can do no more. You know, it's important.
Exactly. So exactly that. So you're probably like running a belief like good mothers are ever present for every school, you know, every school event. So then it's thinking about, okay, so I feel this guilt, and you have to hold it up to the light. So that sports day one is a good example. Like, what do I really feel guilty about here? I feel like that's an important moment in my child's life, and I'm not going to be there. You know, and there is some sadness around that, perhaps. Perhaps you might need to feel that feeling a little bit. But what you don't want to do is then go into that shame spiral about it, okay? So then it's, okay, what can I do? It's, how do I communicate that to my child, and how do I show up in line with my values? Okay, so one of my values is to be, you know, it might be really, I'm just making these up, be really present with my child. Okay, so when I finish work that night, what I'm going to do is this. Or at the weekend, we're going to set up a little sports day in the garden, and I'm going to get them to recreate what they did, and I'm just going to be there. That is just as powerful and as important as
proper gives me goosebumps.
It's beautiful.
That's a
right?
really lovely thing.
Absolutely beautiful. Show me what you did. Like, I want to see it. Like, I couldn't be there because I was working, but show me. Like, I want to see it, and you might want to get them a float, you know, whatever. But I think that's what's really, really important, is to think about what those unsaid beliefs that you have about what the good mother would. Get those written down. Notice that when you do something that goes against those, the guilt's going to come in. Have compassion for yourself for your guilt. Okay, don't beat yourself up for it. Hold it to the light. Feel any feelings that you might need to feel around it, like the sadness of not being at the sports day, and then think about, okay, what might I want to do next about this? The other thing that around guilt that's really important to say is, often it comes from taking on other people's emotions. So, example, I like to go to this breathwork class every Tuesday night. My whole family kick up a bit of a fuss about it because I leave right in the middle of bedtime. My husband's like, really? You're leaving me in the middle of bedtime? And they both only want me at bedtime. So it's hard for him. I get that. I have compassion. I get it. It's hard. It's annoying. Sure. My kids cry every single week. Don't go. Now, one of my values is to do the things that are going to help me be the best person in the world that I can be, right? And going out to things like a breathwork class is one of those for me. So that is in line with my values. So I don't really have anything to be guilty about. But the risk is that I take on their feelings about what I'm doing and make it my own. So my child's crying, therefore I need to feel guilty. No, my child's just crying. Yes, they don't want me to go out, but it's in line with my values to go out. So I think about and someone said this to me on the podcast, beautiful analogy about it, like a glass wall of someone else's feelings and my feelings, and not getting those muddled up. I'm also teaching, by the way, my children that about resilience, that they can be really upset
I was
about
going to say
something.
that, yeah.
Yeah, I can leave. I just because you are upset, you're not going to change my course of behavior. You're not that powerful, my love. That is really important message, really important. I'm going to leave and go to this class, and I'm going to come back, or you'll see me in the morning.
You're modeling it like you said before.
And I'm teaching resilience. You can have all those feelings. Other people are going to do what they're going to do, including your mother. And then you're going to come back and it's going to be okay. So it's really interesting. Over time, it's got loads easier, of course. But had I not gone, that's a really different message. The message might be there, your feelings are too much for me. Subconscious, of course, your feelings flood me. I don't know how to handle your feelings. So I'm just going to make it okay so that you don't have those feelings. That's setting up a different set of messages.
But how easy would it be to do that in micro doses all day? And before you know it, you've lost so much of yourself by giving it up to other people that you find yourself in this place where you feel stuck and you feel broken and alone because you've not gone to your breath class, you've not had that cup of tea with your friend in the morning, you've not gone for a run, you've not just sat and watched Netflix in your pajamas, whatever it is, or whatever it is, you haven't done it for yourself. And then you find yourself in this place where you've neglected yourself.
Yeah. And just to say, for mothers, there's always a trade-off to that choice. So if you're going to sit and have a cup of tea with your friend, you're going to have to accept your house is going to look messier that day.
There you go.
Because you cannot do it all.
No.
So you have, I think there's this idea of like, we have to do all this self-care and I'm like, no. It's about priorities and choices. Like my house typically is very, very, very messy because I refuse when the kids have gone to bed to spend that time tidying the house up. And when I'm with them, we do other stuff. There's no sort of like moral judgment on that. It's just that I choose to do other stuff. Some people might feel better from tidying it, and that might be that's not me. But that's a choice, an active choice that I make. Whereas if I tried to tidy it all up and do my journaling and watch a bit of TV and, God, it would just be like midnight before the time I got into bed. And I know that's the reality for a lot of mothers.
And then you're knocking on the next day tired.
And then I'm going to be stuck and I'm going to be guilty. And then, and you're in that downward spiral. So I think it's really important to always remember that it's, whenever you make a choice, there is a trade-off to that choice. And being clear about what is important to you is really, really, really important as a mother, because the world tells you that it's all important. You've got to have a tidy house and a top job and great kids, and everyone's got to look good, and you've got to go on these Instagram worthy holidays, and you've got to have that house, and you've got to do this, and you've got to do that. The world is going to tell you all of that's important if you listen. So you've got to figure out what is actually important and then organize your time around it.
But the way to do that is base it off your own values, not other people's.
Your own values. Exactly.
Your own values. And it's interesting to me how the most perplexing question you can ask somebody is what their values are. That's why I don't ask anymore. I just ask different questions and extract them. Because it's just like you ask them and people always say honesty, integrity. It's like, yeah, okay, they're the ones you think I want to hear. Now tell me what you really want.
Yeah, exactly.
And this is what I like about you. You're dealing with realism. You're saying, I'm not promising you that all of your stress is going to go away, because that's not real. What I'm saying is, here's a few things that can manage some of that. Here's a few things you might need to accept. And here's few actions you can take, but you're aware of it. And like you said, if you expect certain things, then it's not a surprise. And you give you the opportunity to prepare for it. That's realistic. That's really realistic. But like I said, I'm aware of your time. So I'm going to ask one big question and then we'll come to an end. But I wanted to ask about self-compassion, because self-compassion is easy to say, hard to do. It gets confused with things like self-love. Now, self-love, I understand as a concept, but telling someone that's been practicing self-loathing for 20 years to love themselves suddenly sounds like a lot of work. so I think
it is a lot of work.
Yeah. So it's like, get to know yourself a bit first, maybe, but you mentioned it earlier, positive change can't come from a negative place. So how does somebody nurture self-compassion and self-trust towards themselves? How do they do it?
So lots of different ways that you can start to access self-compassion. I'll share the simplest one because that's, I think, sometimes the most helpful, is that, so you notice a time when you're really beating yourself up as mothers, right? That's going to be easy. You're going to do it in the next 5 minutes. So we're all good. So you want to notice the time when you might be beating yourself up about something and think to yourself this question: what would I say to a friend that I loved in this same situation? What would I say? So, for example, I'm going to put this laptop down. I'm going to walk through into another room, and I'm probably going to realize it looks really messy and I haven't bought anything for lunch. So I need to go and I'm going to start beating myself up about that. Likely. That's just what might happen because of that programming. Now, I know how to change that, but if you were just starting on this journey, a really simple intervention when you notice that is to think, what would I say to a friend? Well, what I would say to a friend is, Zoe, you've got up, you've got 2 kids, really, you've got a great hearty breakfast in them, you've got them off to school happy, you've had a bit of connection time with them this morning, you've powered through loads of emails, you've done some work on your podcast, you've just been on an amazing podcast, which you enjoyed, which is going to support people, and just give yourself a break. That's what I'd say to my friend. So then I want to practice saying a little bit of that to myself. And the gap between how easy that feels to believe is going to show you the gap of how far you've got. You know, just that awareness of how hard and awkward and clunky that feels to say that to yourself. That's your work. And you just want to keep practicing it. What would I say to a friend? What would I say to a friend? I'd say to a friend, she doesn't need to dash out to the shop to get that extra thing because she promised it for the kids. I'd say that she's just giving herself extra stress doing that. Maybe she could just not do that. I would say to a friend that she's doing an incredible job. I would remind my friend of the pressures that she was under. I'd remind her of how far she's come. You know, that kind voice.
Yeah.
And the way that this works, I learned it from Dr. Kristin Neff, who founded this idea of self-compassion, or really brought it to the mainstream, is that over time, that kind voice is going to start to get louder. It's like volume knobs on a stereo. The critical voice is really, really, really loud right now. So loud, you can't hear that kind voice. You can't hear it. And so all you're behaving from that place, as you said, you can't have positive change from a negative place. You're behaving from that place. You're beating yourself up. Let's just start to turn the volume up by asking ourselves that question. Really slowly, that voice is going to start to get louder. And it is absolutely mind-blowing. So I've been practicing this for a while now, probably at least 10 years, like really catching that critical voice and changing it. And what will happen now is it's incredible to me. I still have that critical voice, but very quickly a kind voice goes, no, 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 no. That's what it says. It goes, no, 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 no.
I love that.
You're not doing that to yourself.
Yeah, I love it.
No. This is the truth. That kind voice is absolutely there. I've developed it. I've wired it. I've created it. And what is really, really, really important for parents to know is that the way that we speak to ourselves directly impacts the way that we speak to our children. And the way that we speak to our children develops their inner voice.
Absolutely.
Now, that's not to put pressure on parents, but that's just to say, if you can't do it for you, because some people are like, I don't give a shit that I hate myself. I don't care. If you can't do it for you, do it for the next generation, because they now don't call it the inner critic. They now call it, and then I say they, sort of psychologists and researchers in this space call it the inherited critic.
Oh, yeah.
Because that critical voice is not our own. We have inherited it or absorbed it. So we want our children to have a really kind inner voice, because we know that the research shows that when you have a kind, compassionate inner voice to yourself, you're more resilient. You're actually more productive. I think we might think that if we beat ourselves up, we can achieve more. The opposite is true. You achieve way more when you're kind and compassionate to yourself. It has incredible links to your nervous system and your stress system, which links to your immune system and how well you feel physically when you're kind to yourself. The research is just completely mind-blowing and compelling as to why it's a good idea to try and speak more kindly to ourselves. It also just makes life a lot more enjoyable.
Yeah, which
which
is should
which is
matter.
should matter,
Yeah.
should be the number one reason. No one
Yeah.
asks me that. Everyone's like, well,
Yeah.
what's the research on productivity? I'm like,
Yeah.
okay, I can tell you that, but I could also tell you that it just it's going to make your day feel nicer. You're going to smile more, you're going to feel lighter, you're going to feel happier, all the stuff that we want, by starting to ask that super simple question: what would I say to a friend in this same situation?
It's a perfect question. I got a text message, a WhatsApp photograph of some crunchy nut cornflakes from a female client yesterday. And what that means is, I said to her, every time she does it, send me a photo of it, because it's a win. Because she gets really, really, really up in her guilt and shame about like how she hadn't organized breakfast or dinner or lunch or whatever, and all this different stuff for herself. And she said, and I said, well, what do you want to do in those moments? She said, sometimes I just want a bowl of crunchy nut cornflakes, but I can't. And I'm like, you can.
Yeah.
Anyway, so that she started sending me photographs of these crunchy nut cornflakes. She's going, it's a crunchy nut cornflakes day, and I'm like, brilliant, good. It's not the most nutritious of food, but it's a win in some ways, you know.
It doesn't matter. It doesn't
No,
matter, does it? Because
no.
what matters is when you take that pressure off yourself, she's going to go, do you know what? I'm going to make myself like something really nice today because
Yeah,
I feel like I deserve it. I'm
yeah,
worth it.
yeah,
That's what comes from taking that pressure off, is that
yeah.
it's it's really linked to our self-worth and esteem as well.
It is. You're absolutely right. And this has been such a wonderful conversation. I can think of so many people that are going to love this.
Oh,
But
thank you.
no, they really are. You're a proper gift. You are. You really are. You are, because you're speaking a language that, you know, I've said a lot of things like this before, but I'm a bloke. Doesn't land as quite as effectively.
Well, you say that, but my most downloaded podcast ever, which I think we're hitting, I mean, God, certainly near 200,000 downloads on one episode, is with Dr. Gabor Mate.
It doesn't surprise me.
I think there's something really powerful about a male validating a mother's experience. So I would that sounds like a limiting belief that you told yourself that it doesn't land. I would challenge that, because I think there's something really powerful about compassion for what it's like to be a mother coming from someone who isn't living it.
Yeah, I mean, I saw it with my mum, and it never leave me. And that's why I say practice, because, like, you know, I try my hardest to be the best version of myself I can be. But like you said, the simple things catch you out. Didn't get to have breakfast, didn't get a lot of sleep last night, bit tired and stressed from stuff that's going on with work or with the kids or whatever. Or maybe my wife's not well and she's struggling and I'm finding that difficult. And all these things impact how we are each day, and they
Yeah,
matter.
exactly.
But we tell ourselves that everyone else is nailing it and we're not, which don't help either. You know, but anyway, again, I've started another conversation now. I'm sure you got to go.
No one is nailing it. Let's just have that
No,
as the last thought. No
I
one
think
is
you're right.
nailing it.
So the last thing is, have you got any last piece of advice that you feel would help people with their self-development?
I think we've talked about a lot of it, but I think if someone listening is like, okay, give me one thing, it would probably be just jotting down 5 minutes a day some of your thoughts in a journal. Because when I've taught mothers this, 5 minutes, it's really the tool that I think is free. I think it's super simple. Anyone can do it. You can do it, 5 minutes. Got to be able to find 5 minutes. It breaks that repetitive overthinking. You're going to be able to see where you feel guilty. So it's just, you can free write, or you can find, on my Instagram, I'm always putting journal prompts and content like that up. So you can find that there. But I think it's the number one tool that's helped me completely change how I feel about myself and my mothering and my world, is just getting those thoughts down on paper.
I think it helps you build a relationship with yourself, doesn't it? You know, it gets that stuff out there. Like if you write like no one else is going to read it, then you can be completely honest. And it's only when we get honest with ourselves do we see some real sort of helpful, meaningful change.
Exactly.
Thank you so much for your time today. Do you just want to tell people where they can find you and anything you want to draw their attention to, any projects, anything you're doing?
Yeah, so the podcast is the main way that I show up in the world. It's called the MotherKind podcast. You can just search it wherever you listen to your podcast. And there we've got nearly 300 episodes diving into everything that I touched on, but with way better experts than me. So my gift is I take all of this expert advice across, so many different modalities and ideas, and I chunk them down and I make them super practical and accessible for mothers. So but I speak directly to those experts on the podcast. So if something has sparked you, like self-compassion, I've got one in there with Dr. Kristen Neff, who founded self-compassion. If trauma and healing interests you, I've got one in there with Gabor Mate, who's arguably the world leading thinker on it, or Dr. Nicola Perra, who is an amazing thinker about reparenting. So the podcast is where you want to head to. So that's Motherkind podcast. You just pop it into Google and come up. I also do one-to-one coaching. So I do this 90-minute hour session with me where you can bring a specific problem or challenge, and really quickly I'll help you see it differently and reframe how you do that. So that's on the website. Or if you want absolute transformational change, then you can work with me for 3, 6 or 12 months, and all of that is on the website. There is a bit of a wait list, but I'm working through it. And I've also got associate coaches, so there's people who I've trained that you can work with as well, and that's at a different price point, and they've got more availability.
That's amazing. Thank you so much again, and hopefully we can do this again one day.
Yeah, it's great to connect. I really enjoyed it. Thank you.